Well, hello, everyone. Those of you who know, that is my best Carl Haas impersonation. And today we are starting episode 103. This is the last episode in the series of the JFK assassination timeline. And we're looking at November 22 and subsequent days. We've worked on 63, we divided into three parts. First part took us to middle of October. Second part yesterday took us to the middle of November. And today we'll finish the year. So, a few images. Malcolm Kilduff, here pictured top left, is a spokesperson for the White House, indicating to the press during a press conference subsequent to JFK's death where the bullet entered the president's head. This is a telling visual because it's going to be contradicted later by all the evidence that has been corrupted. He is indicating a shot, and this is what we're going to see, a pattern of all the first responders saying essentially the same thing, that the president was shot from the front and to the right side of the head. There will be similar statements about the throat wound, and it'll only later get changed. But what's most telling is what is immediately in the aftermath said. So that's Malcolm Kilduff. He's like I said, a spokesperson. Famous Mary Mormon photograph there looking up as the president is hit, and Jackie's responding to him, looking up at the direction of the shot from behind that picket fence on the grassy knoll. Same photograph again, I've showed you before, bottom left, of Jean Daniel and Fidel Castro. On November 22nd, at precisely the time JFK is shot, they are lunching together. In other words, they received the news together. And so Jean Daniel is a witness to history in that moment, what Fidel Castro's immediate reaction to JFK's death is. Bottom right, the arrow is Malcolm Perry, one of the attending physicians when JFK was brought to Parkland Hospital, indicating again, in the immediate aftermath, several times over, that the throat wound was a wound of entrance. I just wanted to point him out to you. This is a drawing by Dr. McClellan of the president's head wound. As you can see, the back of the head. I've never heard it described better than in the JFK movie. They say the back of the head was, quote, blasted out. And that is illustrated by this drawing that McClellan made. Top right, obviously on that same day, Oswald will be arrested at the theater. Interestingly, as he's being taken out the front, somebody else is being taken out the back of that same theater. We'll talk about that today. Bottom left is the head x-ray that indicates by the dark region there that portion of the skull has been impacted, but devastated. It's been devastated by the missile that hit the president's head. By the way, these x-rays will later be missing from the Warren Commission report entirely. Some others will be substituted in their place. Bottom right is a comparison of the drawing by McClellan and the autopsy photo that the Warren Commission released later. Of course, you know, the autopsy will be rigged in Washington. And so the evidence that you get on the right of that photo is a drawing by McClellan, who treated the president immediately after the shooting. The evidence on the left is what the Warren Commission submitted as its autopsy photo a year later. And you can see there's a huge discrepancy in the condition of the back of the president's head. Top left is National Security Action Memo 273. We've talked about that at the end of yesterday. This will be signed 4 days after the president's death. Of course, we learned yesterday it was drafted the day before the president's death. Top right is what happens 2 days after the president's death. Jack Ruby assassinates the assassin, forever shutting his mouth. Top or bottom left is LBJ meeting with the Joint Chiefs. Everybody's all smiles, yuck, yuck, yuck. And the topic is Vietnam. And none of these Joint Chiefs ever smiled when they met with JFK about Vietnam because they weren't getting what they wanted. They're all smiles in this picture. Bottom right, we've got this little bit out of sequence. I'm just throwing pictures out. I don't care what order they're in, but we'll talk about this today and how Ruby, before he can shoot Oswald, he stalks him, and he's ever present in Dallas Police Headquarters. Actually, he's everywhere the action is. You know, we talked about this in an earlier episode. I think I titled it "Where's Waldo?" Everywhere how Ruby was, that's where the action was on that day and days subsequent. He was at Parkland. He was at the Dealey Plaza. He was at Parkland. He was at the Texas Theater. He was at Dallas Police Headquarters. Witnesses saw him all these places. He tried to deny it later, but all right. So let's start with today, November 22. Obviously, it doesn't need any introduction. 12:30 p.m. And hopefully I've done a decent job preparing this, laying the groundwork for what is to come by laying out in advance how the Secret Service has stripped away all his protection, just systematically from the day that the Dallas trip was being planned back in Washington. Decisions were being made about personnel. People were being put on vacation. The driver ended up dead. The replacements, driver and the front guy in the front right seat, Greer and Kellerman, neither one did their job at all. I mean, you can't even make an argument they did badly. They didn't do it at all. The bubble top has been removed. The motorcade route has been changed. The 112th Military Intelligence has been told to stand down. The motorcade route's going through tall buildings with 90-degree turns. Godfrey McHugh is no longer in the front middle seat of the limo. The flatbed media truck is at the back of the motorcade instead of the front. 8 of the motorcycles to the side to the front have all been removed. And it doesn't show it in this frame, but as you get closer to the grassy knoll, you'll see that the fields of fire are open and clear. And of course, the front field of fire is open and clear. The back field of fire does not have to be open and clear except for trees, because they're shooting downward over the heads of the spectators. And so the president is literally defenseless. The bubble top's gone. I mean, he didn't realize it, of course. And he's being driven into a kill zone where at least 3 sniper teams are waiting for him. We learned in an earlier episode, the goal is to get him before the front guy has to take him. But if the motorcade enters the front guy's, in other words, the guy on the grassy knoll behind the picket fence, if it enters his field of vision and the president has not yet been hit in the head, they were aiming for a headshot, then he has to take the shot. He cannot be allowed to leave. Once the shooting starts, he cannot be allowed to leave Dealey Plaza alive. So, and for obvious reasons, they didn't want the front guy to have to shoot because it's going to complicate the cover story, which is that all the shots came from behind. But as we learned, when he does enter the field of fire of the assassin behind the picket fence. He has not yet been hit in the head. He's been hit in the throat, but that's not a mortal wound. And so the headshot has to happen. And that's why the cover-up becomes, that's why Thomas Kelly, for example, is there in Dallas that day to clean up any loose ends. Of course, that becomes a loose end, something that has to be covered up, cleaned up immediately and for all time. All right. Same day, told you Jean Daniel and Fidel Castro are eating lunch together. This is after their series of interviews, conversations, during which Jean Daniel is reporting to Fidel Castro what JFK has told him in a series of conversations. And now he is taking down, noting what Fidel Castro is saying in response, and he's going to subsequently go back to Washington and report to JFK. He's the intermediary. And remember, JFK always liked to use media members. Lisa Howard was an ABC News reporter. William Atwood, he advised to resign from his government position, go back to what he used to do, which was media, so that he could fly to Cuba and meet at the airport on his plane with Fidel Castro. And of course, Jean Daniel was media. So they're having lunch together at the beach in Cuba, for Veradero Beach, and they received news of Kennedy's death. And of course, they turn on the TV, they begin watching it. And Daniel is very intrigued by Castro's response, which is, if we discussed this shortly yesterday. Some people believe Castro was behind the assassination. And I think it's patently ridiculous when you know of the back channel and the efforts that are underway to bring peace, normalize relations between the two countries. He understands better than anybody that his best hope is JFK. He'll get nowhere with Nixon. He'll get nowhere with LBJ. And he knows that. And so Castro says, quote, "Everything has changed. Everything is going to change." One of the first questions that he asked John Daniel later is, "Do you know?" And he asks his aides this as well. It's reported by his security chief later. "Does anybody know LBJ's relationship with the CIA?" Boy, isn't that telling? Isn't that telling? He wants to know the next president, what's his relationship with the CIA? As if to say, I already know who killed JFK because his relationship wasn't any good with the CIA. What's LBJ's relationship? Interesting. Same day, obviously the president's body is brought immediately to Parkland Hospital. And by my count, and this has been corroborated several times, 21 witnesses from the hospital. These are not people standing on the sidewalk. These are not just witnesses who observed something with their eyes, not real sure what they just saw. These are doctors, surgeons, nurses, medical personnel. They see a massive wound in the right rear of the skull. And you can see in that picture above, when asked to describe what they saw, they're all doing, and these are not in a room together, all mimicking each other. These are separate interviews, independent of one another, that are all, their hand instinctively is going to the same place. This jives with the drawing I showed you earlier by Dr. McClellan, and said there was a massive head wound in the back of the head, where the back of the head was literally blasted out. And of course, we'll learn pretty quickly, that this was a frangible bullet, which means the entry wound will be small, the exit wound will be massive. So this indicates a headshot from the front, clearly. This is that same doctor, Dr. Perry, repeatedly describing to the assembled media the presence of an entrance wound in the front of the throat. So here's what you have. In the immediate aftermath, the first medical personnel to treat the president, these are the first responders, are saying that the head shot was from the front and the neck wound was from the front. To see how quickly this changes, this narrative changes. And of course, we learned Kelly's job for the Secret Service was to send in the enforcer, Elmer Mueller, to change the stories of people like Dr. Perry and some of these other doctors to the shot in the neck being an exit wound instead of an entrance wound. And the shot to the head, obviously, as you saw in the autopsy photo, there was no massive gaping wound in the back of the head. It was a small entry wound in the back of the head from a shot from behind. I mean, the story will completely change 180 degrees. Same day, November 22nd, the first time the Zapruder film is acknowledged and seen by anybody. Now, we don't see this. The public doesn't see this. We don't see this till years later. But those that are investigating are going to see it. Obviously, Abraham Zapruder is going to see it. And frame 313, as we come to know later, clearly shows a direct hit to the right front of the president's head, as you can see there in frame 313. So if we have an honest investigation and you're compiling the evidence as it stands to this point, here's what you have. You have the doctors who say it was a shot from the front. Two shots from the front, actually. You have now video evidence that shows clearly a shot to the front. You have anecdotal evidence, which shows the spray from the shot all over the back right side of the limo trunk, all over the motorcycles to the rear, to the left, to the right rear of the president's limo. It's on their visors, it's on their motorcycle helmets, and it's on the reflecting glass. There's chunks of the president's head in the grass in the center part of the Dealey Plaza. None of this is possible if the shot came from behind to the right. It's all possible if it came from the front to the right. For example, if the shot came from behind, obviously the head wound would be different, but it came from the front, or if the shot came from the back, all the spray would be on Connolly and his wife in the middle seat, and maybe even the driver. It'd be all over the front of the limo, the right side front, but instead it's over the right side back. That's telling. Again, here's Malcolm Kilduff again, a different view of it, announcing the president's death, using his right forefinger to indicate where the president was shot. And then here are McClellan's drawings. He did a side view and a back view. And as you can see on the side view, he wasn't sure about the entrance wound because he didn't see it. And he wrote it, and he was very specific. He wrote probable entrance wound on the neck at the top right. You see his drawing there. This is a drawing of the right side of the head. This is about a shot to the hairline. He says, I did not see this, but this is where it would line up with what I did see in the back, which is this 4 by 5 inch exit wound where the president's head was blasted out. And then he gave a back view just to show exactly what he saw from the back. He said that he saw the entrance wound low in the neck. He indicates he saw that clearly, and he underlined entrance wound. And then in the back, he says, there was a wound in the back. I did not see this, but it was probably, because it lines up with the entrance wound in the front, probably an exit wound from that same bullet. So McClellan has no axe to grind here. He's not claiming to know everything, but he saw clearly two things. He saw an exit wound in the back of the head. He saw an entrance wound in the front of the neck. And then he used his reasoning skills to say the small wound in the front of his hairline was probably an entrance wound to create that exit wound in the back, and the small wound in the back was probably an exit wound to go along with the entrance wound in the front of the neck. But the wounds that he saw clearly were the exit wound in the back of the president's head, the entrance wound in the front of the president's neck. Clearly enough that he could draw it, sign his name to it, and it's introduced into evidence at that point. All right, same day at 1:50, which we did an entire episode about how quickly the Dallas police had the name of their suspect and were able to produce an all points bulletin, not with the name of him necessarily, but with a description, which was used at the Tippit scene and used to attract attention to the theater. 14 minutes after the assassination, of course, we learned how that happened. That was military intelligence that seeded that name into the Dallas police. And so at 1:50 p.m., following the murder of Dallas police officer, which they said it was 1:15, all the witnesses said it was 1:06. That became a very important distinction. 1:06 makes it impossible for Oswald on foot to have done it and still end up at the theater. 1:15 gives him just enough time to do it, to get there on foot, and then end up at the theater, even though the theater manager, Butch Burroughs, said he sold him a ticket earlier than 1:15 and sold him popcorn. So they're basically calling Butch Burroughs a liar at that point. But they had to monkey with the timeline, is what I'm saying. 3 minutes after Oswald is taken out the front of the Texas Theater to a big crowd, as you saw in the introductory photo, 3 minutes later, another man resembling Oswald, whom the theater manager saw and said he looked like Oswald's brother. It was like a twin. Was taken from the balcony out the back of the Texas Theater into a police car, disappeared. So what Butch Burroughs is left to conclude is that there were two men in his theater that looked like Oswald. The one that sat in the bottom got arrested, taken out the front, and the one who was sitting in the balcony and was taken out the back. And they are identical. At 3:30 that same day, an Oswald doppelganger, probably the same guy, is flown out of Dallas on a CIA C-54 cargo plane. And we told that story in an earlier episode about the witness who happened to be on the flight heading home. He was military and he was getting a flight to his home, and really wasn't even supposed to be on that flight because he was witness to history. And they landed on wasn't even a runway. It was outside Dallas on basically an abandoned piece of land that was under construction, had a roadway cleared out where you could land one of these planes next to the river. And Oswald was hustled onto the plane, this Oswald doppelganger, and then they took off again. And so we now have evidence of what happened to this doppelganger who led the police to the Texas Theater, did his job. It was quietly taken out the front, or out the back, and then flown out of Dallas at 3:30 to disappear into the fog of history. And if it hadn't been for that one witness, we'd never know about it. All right. What happens next? The Secret Service, which is in charge of the president's body, steals the body, essentially, taking it back to the plane, gets it back to Washington so it can go through an autopsy that is controlled, rigged from the get-go. And how do we know it was controlled and rigged? Well, first of all, we've learned, hopefully I've made a good point of this. I've tried to make a strong case that one of the ways you rig things is you determine is the personnel decisions that you make. For example, the Warren Commission was rigged because 6 of the 7 members were military and the 7th was CIA. The Warren Commission was rigged because of who was really running it, the CIA guy, Alan Dulles. The Warren Commission was rigged because of who was feeding it all its evidence, J. Edgar Hoover, FBI. I could go on. We talked about the rigging of the Secret Service protection. How did they do that? They substituted 11 experienced White House detail members for 11 inexperienced members who would take orders. They cycled out, put on vacation, 2 of the primaries, and Gerald Benn, Floyd Boring, and replaced them with Roy Kellerman, William Greer. They got the driver out of the way, replaced him with Greer. Personnel. All right, that's how you rig things. Well, look who was put in charge of the autopsy at Bethesda. It was 2 military doctors who had never performed an autopsy on a gunshot victim before. And the fact that you're choosing military doctors anyway to do the autopsy rather than independent or civilian, military doctors are just like military personnel of any occupation. They take orders. There's a very strict chain of command, and you just do what you're ordered to do. And normally in an autopsy setting, the only person in there is the medical examiner who's performing the autopsy. He's ordering his own autopsy because he's the expert. In this case, the autopsy was attended by scores of people, most of whom were brass. I'm talking admirals and generals, and they were ordering the autopsy. And Humes and Boswell were doing what they were ordered to do, including to burn their notes afterwards. Fink was involved. And one of the admirals there, Calvin Galloway, Admiral Calvin Galloway, who was the hospital commander, and this is, after all, Bethesda Naval Hospital, or the doctors not even to probe the throat wound. Don't even look at it. And then the x-rays taken that night that they released showed an intact rear skull, which is impossible because large fragments of the president's skull are being found in Dealey Plaza, in the grass, on the curb. And the x-ray shows a completely intact head. Where did these pieces of the president's skull come from? It proved that the x-rays were completely fraudulent, and the autopsy photos, which you see here, also completely fraudulent, so as to convince the public that there was not a massive wound in the back of the head, that the doctors who said so were mistaken, that the nurses who said so were mistaken, that all of the medical personnel who said so were mistaken, all these witnesses. Here's the evidence. None of that happened. Of course, this is evidence. This is evidence that you can control. This is evidence you can manufacture. This is evidence that you can corrupt. You can change. You can substitute out a head for another head. You can patch up a photograph. You can even patch up a head if you have to. You can x-ray somebody else's head. That's all stuff that you can do. You can jimmy rig all that. What they saw in the immediate aftermath, you can't jimmy rig. You can't change. When they unwrapped the president's head at Parkland Hospital and half the brain fell out, that's what they saw. And the reason the president's brain fell out is because there was a big hole in the back of his head. All right, same day, This is the autopsy head x-ray that was omitted, left out of the Warren report, top. And here are a couple photos from Parkland Hospital showing the condition of the president's head when he arrived. As you can see, the hair is flopping over, but there's nothing behind the hair or underneath the hair. You can really see it on the bottom right photo where the hair is flopping over the side of the gurney because the back of the head is gone. None of this was in the Warren Commission report. All right, so what's happening? Meanwhile, on November 22nd, still that same day, Jack Ruby, who we didn't realize that at the time, but we obviously learned quickly, is everywhere Oswald is. First, he's in Dealey Plaza watching the fireworks, as he described it. By the way, he described it that way before it happened. Then he's at Parkland and denying that he's at Parkland, but he's at Parkland. And many people think his job was to place that bullet on the gurney in the hallway that they would later claim was the magic bullet. Until that story didn't work anymore. And then this year it became, well, the Secret Service agent, Paul Landis, put it there. And then they got the gurneys messed up. They always get half of it right, or at least believable. At 11:55, he's back at Dallas Police Headquarters. Remember, he goes to the theater next, and he's there when Oswald gets arrested. And then at 11:55, he's on the third floor of Dallas Police Headquarters. And this is after the witness who saw him earlier that morning, delivering a gun to the grassy knoll. Remember, in his truck that was blocking traffic? And here he is. He's given access to the doorway where the prisoner, Oswald, is about to be brought out by police to a midnight press conference. This is 11:55 p.m. I may have said a.m. I meant p.m. So this is in the evening. Oswald was arrested in the afternoon. And he's got a revolver in his pocket. He testified to that later. The entire time he's in Dallas Police Headquarters, which I've got him pictured here several times, top left, you see he is, there's Oswald's back is being hustled through the hallway. Top right, there's Ruby standing there gazing on the entourage as Oswald has just passed through and been interviewed. A little bit larger picture. And the Dallas police are right there. You know, we went into this. I spent several episodes talking about Ruby and his connections to Dallas police and how he was always there. He was an informant for Dallas police. And he comped a lot of the Dallas police officers to his nightclub, Carousel, gave him free drinks and entertainment. And so he was a pretty popular figure in Dallas with the Dallas police. And he was known to be in Dallas Police Headquarters. It wasn't unusual because he was an informant. So here he is in front. He's pretty brazen. He's not trying to hide. And Dallas police officers, and this is supposedly the most wanted man in the world at this time. You'd think Dallas police would be making every effort to secure that area. And here's a guy who's neither media nor law enforcement. He's just a civilian. What are you doing here? Now he's pretending to be media, and in that bottom picture on the right, he's got a pencil and a pad of paper, and he's attending a press conference, and he actually corrects Henry Wade when he mispronounces or misidentifies the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Bottom left, same press conference. He's stalking his prey, waiting for his opportunity to carry out his order, to carry out his role in this. Now, we know what that role is because we can look back in hindsight, we also know because of the things that he did in preparation for that moment. He signed over control of his finances to his attorney because he was going to be away for a while. He paid off all his last debts. He's acting like a man who is condemned, and he knows he's going to be out of circulation for a period of time. And so he's turning over control of his personal affairs to his personal attorney. And he's waiting now for his moment, his opportunity. And on November 24th, he finally gets one. He walks right up to Oswald, yells out, "Oswald," and gets off one shot at 11:21 a.m. on Sunday morning. And at point blank range, like I said, he only gets off one shot because he's quickly tackled. And so that leads to a period of time where Ruby, according to the police that were interrogating him, was extremely nervous and agitated under all kinds of duress. They thought because he was afraid he was going to get convicted and sent to executed. Turns out he was nervous because he didn't know if he actually killed Oswald, and that was his task. He only got one shot off. It was a gut shot. But when he finds out that Oswald's dead, he relaxes and everything's fine. All right. Same day, November 24th. We're now on Sunday. This is the day of the president's funeral, the big funeral in Washington, which has the nation's attention glued to the TV screen. Everyone's watching the pomp and circumstance of the president's funeral. Meanwhile, the new president, Lyndon Johnson, is meeting with Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge, who's just recently back from Vietnam. It's all grins and giggles there in the Oval Office. And Johnson tells Lodge, quote, "I am not going to lose Vietnam. I am not going to be the president who saw Southeast Asia go the way China went," which is a reference to President Truman. Ever since China went red after World War II, and the Soviet Union became the Soviet Union under Stalin, and right on the heels of that, China goes red. Truman got blamed for that, and you can make an argument that the loss of China and the blame that went to Truman for that loss of China really is the reason we ended up in Korea first, and Laos and Vietnam, all these other countries in Southeast Asia, because we sort of got humiliated by what happened in China, and we were just determined not to let that happen again. Communism was not going to spread any further. I mean, it's bad enough that the largest landmass country in the world, the Soviet Union, is red. And now the largest country by population, China, is also red. That's a pretty big chunk of the world map. And so subsequent presidents were under a lot of pressure to stop any more expansion of communism. We saw it with Eisenhower. Nixon would have continued down that path. It began that way with JFK, but then finally JFK stood up to that pressure and wasn't willing to go to Vietnam. And so now that obstacle has been removed. And so now the new occupant of Pennsylvania Avenue, of the Oval Office, is telling the new ambassador to Vietnam, there's a new sheriff in town and we're back on track. We're back on schedule. The war that we want in Vietnam is back on. So it's pretty clear what has happened here. The coup has succeeded in eliminating the guy who's standing in the way of the war, replacing him with somebody who's for the war, who's going to give the Joint Chiefs and the CIA what they want. 2 days later, LBJ signs National Security Action Memo 273, which makes it official, setting the stage for what is inevitably going to happen next, which is the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Now, that was fabricated. That was a remember the Maine event. You remember that story I talked about in an earlier episode about the false flag attack that got us into the Spanish-American War. Here we go again. This is another false flag blamed on the Viet Cong, which is going to result in a resolution to an authorization to use force, ultimately going to result in the Vietnam War. So you can see clearly looking back how the removal of President Kennedy set the stage for the war. And there, we don't immediately go to war, but it lays the groundwork for a sequence of events that by the time these events have happened, the American people are primed and ready, and at least at the beginning, agreeable to using force in Vietnam. It doesn't stay that way, but that's how it begins. So there's been a very clear change in foreign policy with respect to the war. Now, there's a lot of other motives besides Vietnam. Vietnam, I think, is the biggest and the most lucrative, but there's going to be a lot of ancillary benefits to a lot of the conspirators, and that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. I'm going to go through the 5 conspirators, give the flow charts for each, naming names and showing the power structure, who's making these decisions and who's involved, and then showing what the ultimate outcome for each was, and then in total what the ultimate outcome was. And it's a pretty interesting way, I think, to wrap up this series on the JFK assassination, to bring it all together and lay all my cards on the table and try to make a case based on the evidence that I've presented to this point. And then to show what the outcome was and how it has created a template for repeatable actions going forward, which is why the CIA guards so zealously their sources and methods. Because if we knew how many times this same template has been used to get us involved in all of these foreign conflicts around the world and to get us involved in things that we're not completely sure why we're there, what we're doing. But when you start to see the money involved and the pattern that is repeated over and over, you start to realize, oh, this is the same thing. What is past is prologue for the future. And so that's the whole point of this series, is to try to illustrate something that happened in the 60s is still happening today. And what a informed and educated citizenry can do is identify that pattern and can either choose to support it or oppose it, but doing so in a way that is based on experience and education and information based on what they've learned. It's not just being led along like, and this is what sometimes I'm afraid happens. If you don't know what happened in 60, if you don't know what's been happening since 60, when they announce something today, you think, oh, this is new. This is the first time this has ever happened. And you don't see the pattern. You don't see the template being implemented again. And you're more prone to support it. And that's the point of it. It's all about psychological warfare, where you use diversion and you use all the levers of the instruments of government to persuade, to cause hysteria, to cause panic, to cause the American people to become alarmed, maybe afraid, and to turn to their overlords, their masters, and federal government to save them, to make it all right, to fix whatever's broken. And that misplaced trust, and again, that's a big part of it. If that trust gets broken, you got problems. And so it's very important that you create a situation that censors any opposing viewpoints so that the American people don't have any choice but to trust their overlords and their masters, to smear people who learn the truth as conspiracy theorists or whatever, to use public pressure, get people to go along with the narrative, the cover story, so that this template can be repeated and repeated and repeated. And the money can be made and made and made. And that's ultimately what it's about. It's ultimately what it's all about. So we'll do that tomorrow. And tomorrow will be a little bit longer because I think I've got 27 slides on that one. So take a little bit more time. I'll try to take my time going through it. And I'm not under any time crunch because I am home on summer vacation. My summer vacation starts today. Yesterday was report card day, and so I don't have to beat first period anymore. So at least for the summer. So anyway, I hope everybody enjoyed that, and feel free to subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell, thumbs up. Also, feel free to comment on any of these episodes and share with other people like-minded who might be interested in this topic. And check out my website, sphistory.com. And until tomorrow, hope everybody has a great day. We'll see you then.